I never saw myself as a ethnic media reporter. I saw myself as a bilingual English-Spanish reporter because I had to do a lot of the reporting in English and then produce a story in Spanish.
Welcome to the third Noticias, Newswire, and Hispanic PR blog Hispanic Marketing Webinar. I'm Bill Gato. I'm the CEO of Noticias Newswire and the co-editor of the Hispanic PR blog. Noticias Newswire is the only Latino-owned and operated press release distribution service targeting the U.S., Hispanic, and Puerto Rico markets. Hispanic PR blog is a trade journal and resource for Hispanic and multicultural communications professionals. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Yurina Melara. Yurina is a former journalist, communications strategist, and an author of both fiction and nonfiction books. Her latest book is The Power of Ethnic Media, a how-to guide for communications professionals. I really enjoyed reading it last week. Yurina is originally from El Salvador and has been based in Los Angeles for a little over 2 decades. Our goal today is to share insights and strategies and tactics that can help brands, PR practitioners, and organizations be more effective in their Hispanic communication strategies. Hi, Yurina.
Hi.
Yurina, you have now published 2 books this year. That's really impressive. You know, most people dream of writing 1 book, you know, and then you've actually done 2 in 1 year, and you have other books too. So the first one was Todo Personal. It's a Spanish language crime novel set in your home country of El Salvador. And your latest is The Power of Ethnic Media, which is an English language how-to guide for U.S. communications professionals and brands. Congratulations on publishing 2 books this year, right? Can you start by sharing a little bit about your background, Yurina, and how you arrived at this point of being so prolific, you know, with books and dynamic in terms of the range of topics that you write about?
So it might sound like I'm prolific, but really it's not. I just published 2 books in 1 year, but it was just by chance. So the first book that you mentioned, Todo Personal, this one I actually wrote in 2013.
Oh,
And
okay.
that year I found out I was pregnant. So I put it away for a while, had my baby and did all that stuff. Then I started looking for a publisher here in the US when I couldn't find one, because a lot of them, they're just interested in like self-help books and cookbooks, and I always wanted to write novels. So I went to look for in El Salvador, my native country, and I found an imprint called Ojo de Cuervo, which is it's owned by a poet, a Salvadoran poet, woman poet, that helps develop Central American writers. So I started working with her, and it took about 18 months. And finally the book, this one, was published here in the US in May. And this is the Salvadoran version, which is different, the different cover. This one was published in June, and then I did a book tour. So while in early this year, I knew that I wanted a different book, and I already had like a first draft of this one, The Power of Ethnic Media. I started looking for publishers, and the same thing happened. It was, you know, I got letters back saying, no, we're not interested in that topic. This is not something that we want to touch right now. So I decided to self-publish. So that's how this one came out October 1st. And it's available in Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. And that's the story.
Okay. Yurina, thank you. Okay, so the first one, actually, you published it about 10 years ago, and then you republished it.
No, I didn't publish it. No, I wrote it.
Oh, you wrote it 10 years ago. Okay, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yurina, you've had several pivot points in your career. I know from what I read, you started off, you mentioned this in the book, you started off as a reporter in El Salvador. Then you moved to Los Angeles, and you started working for La Ola community newspaper. You took it over. You became the editor quickly within months. And I remember that newspaper. And then you started working for La Opinión, which is the largest Hispanic daily in the country. From there, at some point, you pivoted into communications and then now writing this book. So tell me about, could you have written these books in 2000? Or did all these years of working in LA in journalism and communications prepare you for this book?
I don't think I could have written any of these books back in 2000 when I came to this country. I did have several drafts of other types of books, and the issue that I found myself, and I think a lot of writers that are not used to writing novels, is that I wrote a chapter and then I went back and edited, and I made so many changes that it stopped me from moving forward with the story. So it kind of got really frustrated. So it wasn't until I was at La Opinion, one of my fellow reporters, Eileen Truax, she has like 5 books now. So she introduced me to National Novel Writing Month, which is in November. So that was when I found a system that actually works for me.
Okay. When did you get the idea for The Power of Ethnic Media? When exactly did you get the idea to write that? Did the pandemic have something to do with what you mentioned in the book, or you already had the idea before the pandemic?
So in most of the chapters at the beginning, I start by saying a couple of a story on what made me write this book, and it's the different interactions that I've had with other communication professionals, people with power, sometimes people that are managers or that are used to just mainstream media strategies, and they don't understand the value that our media brings. So it was little by little collecting stories in my mind of, this person said this, but I don't think she's right. So I would just, make a note and write them down. And that's how you see, like in a lot of the chapters, I start with a little bit of the story of what I encountered with. I have not worked for private since I left journalism. I have only worked for state agencies, and that's what I dealt with. So I don't know how it is to work in the private sector doing communications. I can only tell you my experience working in state government and dealing with agencies, with advertisers or PR agencies that get hired to do different campaigns.
Okay. Yurina, early in the book, you make the distinction between media and ethnic media. And you talk about how journalists that work in the United States, they don't see themselves as working for ethnic media. They see themselves as the media. Can you talk about that distinction and why that's so important for marketers to understand?
Yeah, so when I came to LA in 2000, I found myself working with primarily an African American newspaper that was doing Spanish publication. To me, coming from another country, media is media. And I started working there. Then I worked for La Opinion. So my whole career was just in ethnic media. Well, what's considered ethnic media, and I think that's one of the main problems that we encounter when talking about the different types of media outlets. I never saw myself as a ethnic media reporter. I saw myself as a bilingual English-Spanish reporter, because I had to do a lot of the reporting in English and then produce a story in Spanish. So that was a little bit of a culture shock when I got to a state agency, and they were like, oh, the Sacramento Bee or the LA Times, and then, oh yeah, the small newspaper, blah blah. And I was like, no, they're still journalists. So, they're still, we just have a different a different audience and different different points of views.
Okay. Yurina, can you talk about the characteristics of ethnic media and why these outlets are so important? What defines ethnic media?
What defines like news outlets?
Yeah, ethnic media, what the so-called ethnic media. What are the characteristics?
Ethnic media? Yeah, it's usually the audience they serve. There are a lot of us that feel more comfortable in another language. One in California, 1 of every 5 people speak another language other than English at home. In California, again, like 10 million of us speak Spanish at home. So we want to get the news and most of the information in the language that we're most comfortable with, and that's where ethnic media, so news stories in another language comes from, to serve those specific demographics that might be monolingual in a lot of cases or bilingual, but might get the information easier if it's in their own language.
Okay. And what trends are you seeing in ethnic media? Is it growing? I remember a few years back when the print industry was getting disrupted, by the internet and people, getting news online. I remember speaking to one publisher about 10, 15 years ago, and he said, the ones that are hurting are the dailies, but the weeklies and most, like, for example, Hispanic newspapers in this country were weeklies mainly. They were actually surviving. They were actually doing well, because they were, I guess, not so expensive to produce. The fact that they were weeklies. Is that what your research also showed, or in general, is it growing, ethnic media, because of the population trends?
I think it's growing in different ways. I think that, yes, dailies are very hard to produce if they're in paper. However, what we've seen is different newsrooms transforming themselves. And for example, there are daily newscasts being produced here in LA and Florida and New York in Spanish for Facebook. So they're doing like Facebook Lives or in YouTube, and they still have. So they're in Spanish. For when we're talking about where the news is going, right? Where the news trends. So they're being produced in another language. They are using newer technology, so Facebook Lives and YouTube. And they're focusing a lot on what's happening in their own community, so they're very local, and what's happening in their native countries. And one of those examples is Noticias, which is a Salvadoran based, no, LA based Salvadoran origin newscast. So they do Monday through Friday Facebook Lives. And a lot of their content, they have correspondent in El Salvador, Italy. They have New York. So wherever there are a lot of concentrations of Salvadorans, they tend to have a reporter there. So every single day you get news of what's going on in El Salvador and what's going on in your local community. But it's not on print. So that's, now it's on Facebook is where people are. So that's the trend that we're seeing.
And you said it's called LN?
LN. Es Lo Nuestro Noticias. Yeah. So Lo Nuestro used to be a weekly show just for culture. So it was like a cultural Salvadoran and Guatemalan focus show on Saturdays here, and now they turned it into a daily news site.
Okay, right. Cool. And are you part of that? Are you working with them, or?
I like their concept, and I do certain things for them, but I don't know them. It's like volunteer based, just because I love the news. I'm one of those people that as soon as I wake up, I turn on the news. So that hasn't left me. I still love the news, and I help from time to time whenever my responsibilities with the state agency allows me to.
Okay. Yurina, you have a chapter in the book called A Brief History of Ethnic Media in the United States. What were some of the most interesting things you came across as you were preparing that chapter when you did research on the history of ethnic media in the U.S.?
Yeah, so what really jumped at me is that since this is an immigrant country, from the beginning, the United States had publications in different languages. So this is not something new. The first publication was in German for the Germans that were arriving here, and like that we saw different languages according to what was going on in migration waves. And in California we have the Hmong's. They have their own publications, and they're very localized in the Central Valley in California, and part in the Bay Area. The Vietnamese people, they're concentrated in Orange County and in San Jose in the Bay Area. So what I learned is that we've been here. Immigrant waves changes, and the publications change, and language change, but there's still the need to know what's going on in our communities and what's going on back home for the immigrant wave, right? It's different for our kids. Like for my daughter and my son, it's their experience is totally different. But for us that are immigrants, we still want to know what's going on in El Salvador or Guatemala or Mexico. So that's what I learned.
Okay. Yurina, in chapter 4, one of the most eye-opening sections for me in the book was chapter 4, where you talk about this idea that when you approach ethnic media, you shouldn't separate the earned from the paid components. And I'm like, and I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'd love to know, what can you explain that concept a little bit?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about ethnic media tactics, you have to realize that, well, first of all, they're businesses, and they're gonna need that help. Don't just look for them to run your stories for free. You also have to show them a little bit of love, give them a little bit of love. So when you're putting together a campaign, think about, put your money where you want the stories to be, especially with ethnic media. In mainstream media, it doesn't really matter because they're bigger, and there's that big division between both. Even in La Opinión and the bigger Spanish media outlets, Univision, Telemundo, and La Opinión, there's a big divide between editorial and sales. But in smaller outlets and smaller in-language outlets, that's not the case. And even with African American newspapers or publications, the publisher also writes. And in Spanish TV, sometimes the anchor is also the producer, and is also the one going out and looking for sales. So if you're planning your campaign, put a little bit of money. It doesn't have to be thousands and thousands of dollars. With a couple of $100, $200 to $500, which in a campaign it's not that much money. You can actually make your money go farther if you treat them as partners. And I think that's the key: treating in language media as your business partners.
And I've heard that complaint for years from publishers, like, man, these PR people, they keep sending me press releases. They call me, they want me to write about this topic or this announcement, and then and it's for Budweiser, or not to name names, but it's for X brand,
Mhm.
but then they never place an ad buy on my publication. It always goes to the other, the general market outlet, but they want me to run the press releases for me. So when I read that, I was like, that's interesting. But how do you manage that at the brand level? Like, what if they didn't give you enough budget to,
Okay.
place an ad?
Yeah. So the way I deal with it is, yes, I am part of the work stream that is called earned media, and somebody else does paid media. But whenever there is a paid media component, I ask to be included in those conversations to make sure that that whoever we're sending news releases or stories, or we're pitching whatever story it is, that there is that paid component and that they know about it. And it happens a lot with like big advertising agencies. They tend to go by impressions, and they rather buy iHeartRadio than try to do, like, 10, 15 different small radio stations, because that's time consuming, and they can probably just get the same impressions from one iHeartRadio media buy. And not to say don't buy iHeartRadio, that's not the point. The point is, you have to look at the audience that you're trying to reach, and you have to understand that the advertising agency is going to go for the traditional tools that they have, unless you, as a brand manager, understand that in order for your product or your campaign to actually be on the ground, you need to reach those pupuserias, those little restaurants, the market in the corner. Who gets there? Those are the ethnic media, the in-language publications. So if your advertising agency, which probably is not doing it, is doing the traditional route, you as a brand manager should have those audiences in mind. And
Okay.
as for, yeah, you can demand it.
Okay. And you've had a lot of success with that when you go to the brand and say, hey, I need some budget if we really want to influence this media or have them cover us.
Yeah. So in chapter 9 of the book, I actually give a study case of what we did with COVID. So during COVID, I created this special program with, it wasn't that much money. Again, it was like, compared to like the amount of money um, uh, uh, we invested in other campaigns. The Mythbuster campaign gave the journalist, we partnered with 58 different in-language media outlets, and the journalists from those communities got to research their own story. So you just gave them a topic, which was, what are the myths in your community that is affecting the people getting vaccinated, so vaccination rates. So the journalists went out, reported the story, wrote it, produced it, and they were part of those fellowships. And the amount for fellowship, it was anywhere from like $250 to $500, depending on if it was print, if it was video, if it had like if it was like a package. So you can see it's not expensive. We spend a lot more money a lot of times in meetings with the advertising agency, with the PR agency. When we're in those meetings, just going like, we're planning on doing this and that, and they have like 5 different people, and they're all charging you $100 to $250 each. You can actually use that money in getting a product. So you just have to think about it a little differently.
Okay. Okay. Yurina, toward the, I don't want to give away the entire book, By the way, you have like a hardcover version of it.
Yes, so I got both, and I
I got
love the
I got the
hardcover.
soft cover.
Yeah,
I want a hardcover version, autographed by you.
I'll sign it and send it to you.
Okay. All right. So not to give away everything in the book, but toward the middle you talk about, and I think this is probably more geared for someone who's like a non-Hispanic
Mhm.
PR professional, non-African American, non-Asian American PR professional. Not so much us because we're used to this concept, but you talk about to really understand when you're doing outreach, to really understand the nuances of the community that you're trying to reach and finding the right outlets. Can you share a little bit about how to do that? What's the best approach? How do you research that?
Well, if you already have a multi-ethnic PR agency or advertising agency, use them. A lot of times they know who the reporters and the producers and what the outlets are. So make sure that that you carve some time and actually go and visit them and like talk to them. If you don't have an agency, I would recommend just doing, a Google search, figure out the area that you're trying to reach, and make calls and go out. You'll be surprised how many people will agree to meet with you, even if you don't have a budget in mind, or just to meet and greet. That's what I've been doing a lot in the past 2 years. I've been meeting with AAPI outlets, media
Okay.
outlets,
Okay. Okay.
because Spanish, that's where I'm from. So a lot of them are my all-time friends, right? So I need to concentrate, focus on the segments that I'm not that familiar with. So that's when I go out and meet with API media outlets, and so far everyone has been so happy to actually get some FaceTime.
You make a lot of emphasis on that in the book about reaching out and just showing up to the events. That was my next question. And there's a wonderful anecdote in there about Kamala Harris and La Opinion. And I
Yeah.
would love for you to tell that story about the importance of showing up and how, okay, I'll let you tell the story because it's a wonderful story.
Yeah. So it was 2015. She was running to become the senator, and La Opinion, which is the largest Spanish daily in the country, had two options: either with Kamala or this other Latina that I'm not going to mention. And we had an event. It was some tequila tasting, very low key in the office. It wasn't even like at a big event or anything. It was just, drop in. La Opinion invited a lot of different people, and decision makers and so forth. Super low key. One of the editors was the one making the drinks. That's how low key it was. And Kamala Harris shows up, and she just wooed everyone. She was very approachable. She started telling stories. She even spent some time with my husband, who's a history teacher, and they were talking about the Constitution of the United States, and she was just having a blast. And when it came time to actually, get behind a candidate, uh, uh, it wasn't that many days after. It was like the following week or something like that. La Opinion editors decided to go with her. So I really think that face to face really made a huge difference.
Wow. It was a powerful anecdote. Because the contender was Hispanic, a Hispanic,
Yeah.
female politician from Los Angeles, and you would think that Opinion would support the Hispanic, but Kamala showed up. The other one didn't, and I was like, wow, the power of showing
Yeah.
up. It's good leadership.
Exactly. And the same thing happened with when I was at the Wave newspapers. We had a major there was some election coming on, and this white guy showed up and got the endorsement of the Wave, and it made news. Like even the LA Times had the story on why the Wave was supporting this guy and not the black candidate. So that FaceTime really works.
Yeah, there's a famous quote from John Maxwell, the leadership coach. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And then you've got to be there. You've got to show up. Very very powerful story. Yurina, you talk about the concept in the book about trusted messengers. Can you share a little bit more about that tactic? Trusted messengers.
Yeah, so especially when you're trying to sway people's minds. With the COVID campaign, for example, we were trying to give people confidence. So we used a lot of in language experts and as trusted messengers, as well as the publications as trusted messengers. So the whole concept of trusted messengers is, do you trust the person that is talking to you, not the one talking about you? So that's the huge difference. A lot of times what we've seen coming out of like the big advertising agencies and stuff, when or even like public affairs, they're talking about you but not talking to you. And trusted messengers have that quality where you feel like they know you and they're talking to you. So I think that's a really good concept.
Okay, Yurina, you talk about the challenges of. Can you talk about the challenges of working with ethnic media? You devote a chapter on that, and then you start the chapter by asking to acknowledge one's inherent racial bias. Can you share a little bit about that? Not to give away the whole book again, but
Yeah. Well, I think that we all have inherent biases, the ones that we're aware of and the ones we don't know. And by being humble and understanding that we might have that, it's either racism or some type of cultural. You might seem your your culture. You might think that your culture is better than the other ones, or the different in Latin America. The lighter skin you are, the more you seem like like you might have better opportunities. So there are a lot of biases that socially we acquire a lot of times without even knowing. So that's how I started the chapter. Just take an inventory and acknowledge that you probably have biases, and in certain industries it might show it in different ways. In PR, for example, in marketing, it might be shown in the people you hire. It might be shown in who you choose to be in your commercial. It might show in in the different segments of the population you reach out to. So that's something that we really have to be aware as communicators, and especially in positions like, for local, state, or federal government, where your responsibility is even bigger because you're there to make sure that everything goes well, and you're trying to do good to preserve the public good. So that's how I start the chapter, and then I move forward to the other ones, the other challenges that might be language. And like I said, in the past 2 years, I've been trying to learn how API media works. And I know I'm not going to speak, any of those languages, but I'm trying to understand their culture and the different connotations that sometimes one thing might have over the other. So all those different things, when you're thinking about your campaign, you have to, like, again, take an inventory.
Okay. Any other challenges you can share with us about, aside from language, obviously, any other challenges with working with ethnic media? I imagine
Yeah.
budgets sometimes, or not having a really big staff at the smaller publications or TV stations or radio stations or shows.
Yeah, so for smaller publications, what you have to keep in mind is that they're not gonna show up to your press event because they probably don't have the people. It's probably the editor, the assistant editor, and the graphic designer doing all the work. So you got to be strategic when dealing with smaller outlets like that. What do they need? What kind of pictures they need? What kind of stories? Look at the stories they run. Do they run more tips? 5 things you should know, or do they do more of the testimonials? So those are different things that you have to keep in mind, and try to give them as much as possible, especially the smaller ones, right? So if you don't have a budget for translations, but you give them a good story that they can easily translate, they love that. And that comes with a nice image, they'll run it. So that you have to look at the challenges that you have, if it's money, if it's staff, if it's whatever it is, and try to come up with ways to get closer to those outlets.
You also talk about monitoring as one of the challenges. Tell me more about why is that such a challenge with ethnic media, and how do you overcome that? Any tips for PR professionals?
It's really hard, especially because of the language issue, right? So how do we usually monitor? You have the big agencies, Station, Meltwaters, and Mugrag, and all those agencies that promote giving you the clips that you need, but they're mostly in English. And if you're trying to do and if you're trying to get to a certain demographic, they might not show there. So that's when you have to look at the media outlets as your partners and treat them like that, so that you'll get that clip. Because that requires them to go out of their way to actually get back to you and give you what you need in order to measure the impact of your campaign.
Okay. What are some of the what are some of the mistakes that PR pros make when they're targeting ethnic media?
That they only think of the big guys. They only think Telemundo, Univision, and that's it.
The bigger players.
Yeah, which is awesome. I mean, Univision a lot of times here in LA has more audiences than the English language ones. But that's not enough. That's just not enough, depending on what you're doing, right? Because if you're doing just like regular Coca-Cola kind of thing, then yeah, whatever. But if you're trying to have an impact, you really have to look at demographics and audiences and languages and all those things.
When you're dealing with a smaller client with a smaller budget, small business, how does that shape your PR plan? What tips can you give for working with clients that have a smaller budget?
I actually had a campaign this summer that had a tiny budget. It was for the extreme heat. And what we did was we prioritized the regions where extreme heat affects the most people, with an equity angle. Like, who are they? Who are the people that are most affected by it? And we met those people where they were. A lot of times a lot of times it's social media. Other times it might be at a community event. Another times, so it's different depending. You can have a successful PR campaign with a small budget if you know who your audience is.
Okay. Yurina, you end the book with a detailed case study
Yeah.
of how California worked with ethnic media during COVID. The CDC had data that showed that Hispanics were hospitalized at rates that were 4 to 5 times higher than non-Hispanic whites. So you guys came up with the Vaccinate All 58 campaign. Can you share more about that experience?
So it really was like that. That book. It was the worst of times. It was the best of times, because it was
Tale of
horrible.
Two Cities.
What?
Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities.
Yes. So it really was like that. It was, worst of times. The pandemic, the first one in the last 100 years, impacted everyone. But it was the best of times in the way that we realized how to partner with the ethnic media to get our message, to get more people vaccinated, especially in those hard to reach communities. So that's how I end the book, giving a specific tactics of what we did. South LA, for example, had a lower than usual vaccination rate. And I teamed up, well, we teamed up with a local newspaper, a local church, and we did vaccination, vacunas, las posadas, con vacunas. So vaccines with las posadas. So very cultural, if you don't know what las posadas is, it's a reenactment of Mary being pregnant and going around trying to find a place to give birth to baby Jesus. So Las Posadas, very cultural in Mexico and Central America and the rest of Latin America. And what we did was we put a vaccine clinic at the entrance. And so as people were going into the church and it was being live streamed and everything, we actually got people vaccinated there.
Cool. That was Las Posadas con Vacunas. That was part of the strategy for Vaccinate All 58.
Yeah.
And that's the second time. About a year ago, I interviewed Gloria Rodriguez from Comunicad, and she's now part of Reuter Finn. And she mentioned one case study where years ago there was research that showed that Hispanic mothers weren't comfortable strapping in, placing the baby in the back seat. So they actually got the church involved and having the priest come out and bless the baby seats. And so it's the second time I hear of a campaign where the church gets involved, as part of the strategy. A good cultural fit there.
Yeah. And we got people there using one of the smaller news outlets in the area. So that Elena Noticias that I talked about, so we used them to promote the event. And so we got a lot of Central Americans, plus we got also African Americans in the area.
Yurina, as part of the campaign, the Vaccinate All 58, you mentioned that you had to create a support program for journalists called Mythbusters Fellowship. Why was that necessary?
There were a lot of myths popping up, a lot of mis and disinformation popping up in social media. And how do you deal with that? Well, you counteract with information, and that Mythbuster campaign, that's the partnership that I told you we had with 58 journalists, where each of them went into their communities to figure out what the myths were that were influencing people in not getting vaccinated. So that's how we address that mis and disinformation, providing good information.
Okay. I got about 5 more questions, Yurina. I appreciate your time today. Was there anything that you would have wanted to add to the book that you couldn't for some reason or other, for length purposes, or looking back now?
No, not really. I wanted the book to be a manual. So I didn't want like a bunch of stories and going like me, 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 me. I wanted something that it could easily, you can read this. It's a little over 100 pages. You can read it in 1 or 2 hours, depending on how fast you read. It can give you ideas. The paperback version is the most popular one, and you can mark on it. You can use it. You can use it as a guide. That's what I wanted. I wanted a guide. I wanted everyone to talk about it, because what happens a lot of times is that when we're talking about language and immigrants, a lot of the times those things get like put under the rug and nobody wants to talk about it. I wanted to bring it to the public and say, hey, let's talk about culture. Let's talk about language. We're all here. We're all in the same space. Let's make sure that the decision makers understand their biases, and let's make sure that the people running mainstream media campaign also understand that there are other media outlets that you might not know about, which it's okay, but you got to get informed.
Okay, Yurina, as far as like when I first saw the title of the book, I thought, hey, this might have some top 50, top 10 lists of the top Hispanic media outlets, the top African American, top Asian American media outlets. I didn't see that in the book, and I was just wondering, is that something you plan to include later on?
No,
And no, okay. And
guide.
Huh?
It's not a directory.
Okay. Where do you recommend that PR professionals and marketers go to find the best, latest, fresh information of the top outlets in each community?
Well, that's the thing. If you're thinking about just the top, then that's the same mentality that gets you to Univision and Telemundo. I would like people to go a little bit deeper and just don't think, yes, I know people's time is valuable, and you just want the best, the top, the biggest one, but depending on your campaign, that might not work for you. So yes, so my book is not intended as a directory. It's not intended to push an agenda. I just want us to talk about language and race and talk about culture and that all those differences are okay. It's okay.
This is more of a selfish question since I co-own a wire service, but how effective are press releases when you're doing outreach to ethnic media? Do you still use them? What do you think of them?
So coming from a larger media outlet, they were very useful. But when you're a smaller media outlet, you might not have the time or the staff to actually look at the different, all the press releases out there. So that's where the connection comes from. And it would be, yes, I like press releases. There was a time in my life when I thought press releases were like so 90s, but I understand the value of them. And because they're like your base. They're like, okay, this is a good topic. Let me get some testimonials. It has good data. Let me see what kind of story I can do. So that works very well when you have a larger staff. When you have at least 4 or 5 reporters, you can use the press release as a guide to produce a story. But when you're a smaller outlet, you want something more that you can run easily. So instead of a press release, or maybe you have a press release and maybe some testimonials at the end. So finding a way that you can package information where reporters don't have to spend that much time, I think works better for smaller outlets. Does that make sense?
Yes, I appreciate that. How are you promoting the book? Any other insights you can share about how you're going to promote the book? Are you going to do book fair appearances, or what's your plan there?
I'm relying a lot on my friends. So I'm planning to do a different college tours. Maybe come this spring. I have a couple of options. I'm thinking some of Cal States and maybe a couple of private colleges. And I'm hoping, people like it enough that they can recommend it. That's my strategy. So
Word of
like
mouth.
real strategy.
Yeah, word of mouth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Anything else that I may have left out that you want to share? Any tips, strategies for PR professionals, communications professionals that you want to share?
Let's see. No, not really. I think we talked about the different things. I found out that I like producing books. So I actually, it's so funny because I came up with this like 2 weeks ago. I actually wrote a guide on how to write a novel.
Wow. Okay.
In Spanish.
Cool.
So I'm just, thinking of ideas on how to do different things and just following, okay, so how to do ethnic media? Well, now how to write your own novel in Spanish. So I don't know. I just finding different ways to put my thoughts out there.
Okay. Is that one already on Amazon? The one you just held up, the novel writing guide? Wow.
Well, this one is also a how-to guide. So it goes step by step with, if you have different ideas for the book you want to write, what's your conflict? So it takes you like step by step, and it has space for you to write it. So it's like a workbook.
Workbook, yeah. Very cool. Yeah, thank you for your time. How can people reach you if they want to get your consulting, and where can they find your books? They're all on Amazon right now.
They're all on Amazon right now, little by little. They're also going to be available in Barnes and Nobles. And how to find me? Well, I have a website on YurinaMelara.com. There you can find my email, which it's my name, Yurina.melara@gmail. There, I really like the show New Amsterdam, where the doctor starts by saying, "How can I help?" So that's me. Like, it's like, how can I help? What do you need? So if there's anything, if there's any questions that people have, or sometimes you just want to run things by someone, I'm always happy to help. And that's the thing. That's why I wrote this book, trying to help people navigate, ethnic media. That's why I wrote this book, trying to help people that are trying to write their novels. So I'm all about helping.
Okay. And so that one's only available in Spanish, the novel writing one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because and there's a reason why I am trying to promote Spanish writing. It's so important not to lose that.
Right.
Well, at least for me.
I need a copy of that one too. Nina, thank you. Gracias. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.